Get inside their mind. Caring for Kids God's Way presents Dr. Chap Clark, Associate Professor of Youth, Family, and Culture at Fuller Theological Seminary, pastor of Emmanuel Church in Burbank, California, and author of the book Hurt Inside the World of Today's Teenager. Now here's Chap with Preparing for Adolescence.
It's great to be here to talk to you about the whole issue of preparing for adolescence. And what we mean by that, obviously, is preparing ourselves for helping kids as they go through adolescence, not necessarily preparing our homes, our community to receive adolescence. It's really about making sure that we have ourselves fit and ready to guide children and even young adolescents through this really difficult and at times highly perilous journey known as adolescence. And oftentimes we kind of look at them and we don't understand them quite as well as we wish we did, and sometimes we have assumptions we bring in to play with what to do with adolescents, what we think about them. In another one of the tapes in this series, in trying to understand them and their culture and what they're going through, that's an important aspect of our work with them as we prepare for them. Whether you're a parent, a youth worker, a pastor, a parole officer, a social worker, therapist, whatever role you play in either directly working with kids or in helping other people to work with kids, that's the kind of thing we're going to be talking about today. I will say a few things that are more specifically focused on parents, but for the rest of us, we need to know that too in order to help them. And for all of us, there's ways that we can prepare ourselves and the systems we run to prepare for adolescence. That's what we're going to be doing today. I see basically 4 keys to helping ourselves prepare for adolescence and to prepare adolescents for the journey ahead of them. Earl Palmer's a pastor in Seattle, Washington at University Presbyterian Church. He once said in a small group I was in with him, he made the comment that you cannot prepare the road for your child. We want to prepare the road for our child. We want to protect them. We want to guide them. We want to put up the walls around them to pick the rocks out of their way. He said, you really can't do that in this culture. We need to prepare our children for the road. And as we go through this, in these 4 keys we'll be using to look at this issue of preparing for adolescence, we're going to try to figure out what does it mean to give the best possible environment for our young people to be able to make it through the journey we call adolescence. Roughly 10 or 11 years old up till, for many kids, the mid-20s. How do we make that journey a little shorter? How we can prepare them for adulthood, and how we can help them become the kind of adults that God intended them to be. And it's not just development we'll be talking about. It's also a spiritual, theological understanding of development. You can't take spirituality and discipleship and put it in a little box and put it off to the side. Or take human development and the issues related to children and childhood and adolescence and kind of separate it from all the other things that they face. Because growing up as a person, whether it's infants, children, early adolescence, mid-adolescence in high school and college, or late adolescence, or even adults, all of the issues we face as we move on in the journey of maturity, including spiritual maturity, it's all one package. So as we talk about preparing for adolescence, we're going to try to make sure in these 4 keys that we are asking any question related to any of the aspects having to do with this journey known as adolescence, relating to childhood and also the entrance into adulthood. Let's go with the first one. First key has to do with understanding their journey. Now, I spent a lot of time talking about that on another tape in this series, Understanding Adolescent Culture and Life. But just to highlight a few of the issues, just to make sure we're on the same page, to remind possibly you, what we want to think about in understanding where kids are is that life has changed dramatically. It's not the same world that you and I grow up in. I am a person that looks easily in my late 40s, but I'm actually in my early 50s. So life's different for me. But if you're in your mid-30s, life in high school and early adolescence and middle school is not the same as it was for you. And even if you're 23 years old and you're a youth pastor, or you're a teacher, or you're a young therapist in training, you may think you're very close to where kids are today, but the reality is culture's changing so dramatically that these changes we have to keep up in order to understand not only where kids are today, but how do we prepare children to enter this adolescent world that they will soon face. So that's the first thing in understanding, is making sure that we're aware of the changes. To do that, we have to recognize that adolescence is about this one thing, just one thing. It's the movement from childhood to adulthood. I like to use, as I showed in the other video, tightrope as an illustration, where the left pole is childhood, the right pole is adulthood, and there's a tightrope that every kid has to go across. And here's what's interesting about that tightrope. No matter how old you are, you went through adolescence. It's been around about 100 years. It's an invention of society. It's not going to go away. And every one of us had to move from childhood to adulthood. As we did, we had really one thing in mind with 3 tasks. That one thing in mind was, I need to figure out how to become a unique person. I need to be my own person. And I'm responsible for taking this self as I go across the tightrope and inserting myself into adult society, because there really are very few people and places that automatically receive me. When I go to work, I have to somehow insert myself in that job, not only in the task, but in the relationships. When I develop a romantic relationship and ultimately possibly get married, I have to figure out on my own what it means to be in that kind of level of intimacy. If I go to church, we just assume that adults know how to be in relationship with each other, and very few adults have been trained what it means to be in intimate relationships with each other. These and so many other issues is what adolescence is about. I'm trying to figure out how to move from dependency as a child into becoming an adult that's connected to other people. So I have 3 tasks. I need to figure out who I am. That's identity. I need to figure out what power I control. You know, who's in charge of me? What do my choices matter? That's called autonomy. And I have to figure out, where do I fit? Where's my safe place? That's belonging. So every child, at some point, roughly 11 or 12, begins the journey on that tightrope, asking those 3 questions every day. So parents, as well as everybody else that works with kids, that is the biggest task. Understanding that the journey is not about you. It's not about what you want and you feel and you're forcing and your kids displeasing you, youth workers, teachers. It's all about us. Even therapists sometimes can fall into that category of trying to have it fit into our clean, neat therapeutic applications. What we have to recognize is this cauldron known as the adolescent experience. We have to recognize it's about them. Every one of their journeys is absolutely unique. Every one of their journeys is fraught with danger in their perspective. Every single adolescent feels like a big, huge, fat elephant when there's a huge tightrope that's bending in the middle and it's shaking, and everybody's watching them. Everybody's evaluating them. Everybody has a critical eye. So whether it's a parent, teacher, counselor, youth worker, pastor, whatever role you play in preparing for adolescence, preparing a child, but also preparing the people in the kid's life, is we need to remember we have got to understand this journey. That's what that other tape really spent time doing. But as we understand, there are 4 things that we have got to be aware of. We need to recognize in ourselves. The first is this. We need to check our own attitudes to prepare for adolescence. Our attitudes as adults are telepathic to kids. Not with children, and even not with early adolescents. Until they're about 13, we can pretty much fake it. We can drive them to soccer. We can be a middle school leader. We can be a parent that tries to get them to clean their room or do their homework. But once they become abstractly aware, happens roughly about 14 years old, about the time they hit high school. They're starting to really read the cues, not only of their current experience, but to reflect on their experience of childhood. If they sense in any of us who are engaging with them, whether it's parents or other adults, that our attitude is really not about their best interest, that we have another agenda in mind, that there is our agenda that they are expected to fulfill the mold that we have for them, so that we feel better about ourselves, they will pick up on that, and they'll flee from us. The first thing in understanding is watching our attitudes. So parents especially, but all of us, do you have an agenda for your kid that's more about you than your kid? What are the agendas that you carry around for your young person? Maybe you always wanted to be a starter in high school sports, and maybe you did do that and you didn't get the accolades you wanted, or you did get them and you missed them from those days. But maybe your kid was not created by God to be a starter, or really doesn't like that particular sport. In my study in the book Hurt, Inside the World of Today's Teenagers, one of the biggest things I found is most high school kids, at the bottom line, do not love their sport for the sport's sake, but somehow it's a part of the package of surviving high school life. And most of the time they carry bitterness to their coaches and parents from childhood over how they were forced and pushed to play according to their agenda. 10-year-olds developmentally do not understand winning and destroying their opponents. That is learned behavior from their parents and coaches and others. What's your attitude? Do you really understand and want to understand kids because of them? That's the first thing. There's 4 in terms of understanding. The second one would be this, is we need to learn how to ask questions of young people. Children, you develop this with kids as you prepare them for the adolescent journey. Is every adult, if you can shift from a mode of correcting and instructing to a mode of asking questions and inquiring. Not only is our attitude telepathic, but in our communication styles with young people, whether children or early adolescents, even mid-adolescents, if we are people that are in their lives in order to fix them, they will run from us and feel more abandoned than when we began the conversation. See, here's what happens. Typical conversation, a kid feels safe enough to trust us with information. Let's say we're a parent and your kid begins to talk about a teacher that's been tough. Almost immediately, our knee-jerk reaction is to somehow move to, well, here's what you can do about it. Or do you want me to step in to the fixing it mode? I'm not just talking about women. Men sometimes do this too. Obviously, that would be what's called sarcasm, which may not be on the tape very often, but I want to throw that out there. Yeah, guys are worse at this. I would like, if there's a group of you right now, I'd like all the men just to look at any woman there and say, yes, I'm a guy and I'm worse at this. The reality is most guys are terrible at asking questions and having a spirit and an attitude of being present in the midst of life circumstances with another. But men and women, you have to do this. You need to learn how to ask questions and have a spirit and an ethos that says, I want to know more about what you're feeling in this setting. It's not natural to an awful lot of people. But in understanding, we have to do that. Thirdly, is we need to learn how not only to have an empathetic connection with kids. Even our own children, that's tough. But we also have to have the skill to learn how to truly listen. Now, we don't have the time here in this particular event to give you an exercise in listening. But if we did, it would be really helpful for you to begin practicing how to listen to each other. One thing you may want to try is when the tape is off, and if you're with one other person, just try this. Have one person be a listener, another person have a problem. And then the listener, you become the absolute best possible listener you could. And then the other person just talk about some kind of problem. Then stop and reverse it. And then the person that was the listener, you try to share something relatively important to you. And the other person, you employ every technique you've ever experienced of a really bad listener. And talk about that. What's your listening IQ? What's your grade you'd give you as a listener? Nobody listens to young people. Do you know that? Nobody sits down, looks them in the eye, and shows them value and respect by creating an environment where they feel safe to talk. And here's something you need to recognize as they get older. By the time you hit mid-adolescence, you really don't trust anybody who wants to listen to you until it's late at night. And that's when you're ready to be listened to. Parents, you got to be ready for this. To prepare for adolescence, you get a lot of sleep when they're roughly 7 years old until they hit about 14. Get a lot of sleep then. You can make them go to bed at 9 and turn off stuff. By the time they hit about 14, they're going to really want to talk to you, parents. And it's going to almost always be really late at night. Will you have prepared your ground of relationship where when they walk in your room at 10:30, 11:30, sometimes later because of the homework and the experiences they have in life, to focus on them and listen? And then the fourth would be, and I mentioned this in the last tape, That's where I finished, actually. We've got to figure out how to communicate that we are a fan of our kids. To prepare for adolescence and to understand them, we need to have an attitude that's about them and their agenda and what's best for them. We need to somehow have a spirit of question asking instead of fixing. We need also to learn how to be good listeners. And lastly, we need to communicate that we are their fan. Jesus Christ is our fan. If you believe anything about the gospel, hopefully that is spilled into your life, is that God is our fan, our greatest fan. And a true fan is not a fan that's a fan when you score, or when you win, or when you perform well, or you look just right, or you live inside the box. A true fan is a fan that goes deeper than performance and image, deeper than your ability to contribute. A true fan is someone that says, I believe in you. To understand kids, to come alongside them, to make sure they know we care. We've got to offer them the gift of being their biggest fan. So, very first thing. And I know that may sound trite, it may sound obvious to some of you, but I've been working with parents and youth workers and pastors and teachers for a long time and working closely with young people. And the biggest issue, they don't believe that anybody cares enough to understand them. Those 4 points, they're on your screen right now, just so you can take a look at them, maybe stop the tape and consider them. That's the first key, is understanding in preparing for adolescence. Now, we move on to the second key, which actually is to somehow understand what it means to take kids along the developmental journey from childhood and to help prepare them for the journey of adolescence, to prepare all the systems around them to make sure that they get through it. And we're going to be highly practical as well as a little bit theoretical. And the second particular key would be to provide sanctuary. First, we understand with compassion and care. And now this second key to preparing for adolescence is that our job as adults in the lives of children and adolescents is we are commissioned by God Himself with the sanctuary that a young person can experience as they move through adolescence. That's our job. Sanctuary, the root idea of sanctuary is safe place. It is holy, sacred, but safe at its very core. What does it mean to provide sanctuary? Well, to use the model that I've been using both in the last another tape and this one, the one on understanding adolescence, is the tightrope again. If we think of a tightrope that has a little foundation and 2 poles going up, and then a kid moves along this, the way that I try to describe this, as you can see on your screen, is the foundation that provides a sense of sanctuary for a child and an adolescent all the way through their life, is the foundation of family, safety, and stability. Family safety and stability is that kind of idea that regardless of how bouncy adolescence is or how shaky that growing up as a child is, they can have confidence that the entire journey is securely bolted to the foundation of family safety and security. What does that mean? What does that look like? Well, one of the problems that we have, a misnomer that we have, is that there's 2 kinds of families in the world. That there are healthy families of people that are attractive, fit, people, the kind of folks that people want to look at. People look a lot like me, of course. And then there are those that are in crisis, sickos, screwed up families, really a mess. And we put folks into one of these 2 categories. We want to make sure, and it's easier to live our life this way, that we just categorize folks. They're great, they're healthy. Oh, they're a mess, they're in crisis. When in reality, we all know, if we're honest, as we begin picking up the rocks of our own life and seeing the little bugs crawl out, there's not a single family that's completely and totally healthy in the way that we describe that. Nobody is anywhere near that healthy. And there's some families that are in deep crisis, but actually, life is about a continuum from healthy to crisis, and almost all of us are in the middle of this. Almost all of us are somehow moving between relatively healthy and relatively crisis. And as we go through this, moving through our lives, it could be on one day we're relatively in crisis and that kind of stabilizes and we're feeling a little more healthy. And then something happens, we're more to the crisis side. What we all need to recognize is the idea that all of us are in pain at some level, and all of us have the ability to be safe and stable for one another. And that's really the important key in this one, regardless of your family situation. Maybe you have going through a divorce right now, or you've been through a divorce, and maybe you've heard some of the people that say things like, kids are resilient. Kids are resilient. They do report healing out of divorce. But there's no study anywhere that proves that there is not some kind of lasting longing that's affected by a broken family situation. That doesn't mean it has to kill them. It doesn't mean it has to clobber them. It doesn't mean it has to ruin the family. There are things that can throw us off balance. What is the most important thing we need to be aware of? And these things I'm going to talk about in terms of providing sanctuary aren't sequential. They're all important, but on this one, here's what family safety and stability is. You could be a single parent. You could be a foster parent. Grandparents. Blended family. Nuclear family. Dad that travels. Abandonment. Death issue. We as adults get so wrapped up into all the issues that drive us. Here's our job as adults. We need to make sure that when our child is in that home, when our child talks to us on the phone, when a child that we're caring for, or an adolescent, that somehow we're relating to, they experience safety and stability from the adults in charge of their life. We may need significant help, good friends, small group at church, therapy possibly. And most of the time, we need at least one or all of those things. But our job is to provide sanctuary, so stability, safety. Don't take it out on the kid. One example of this, a therapist I was talking to a week ago told me, I have a lot of adolescent clients. And roughly 80 to 90% of the time, when a family brings in an adolescent who needs therapy, the adolescent is the identified patient. Hey, this kid needs to get fixed. This kid's cutting. This kid's dealing with drugs. This kid's really sad, really messed up, acting out. We need to get our kid fixed. And this therapist said, I've been doing this a long time and I got a lot of training experience, and I've come to the conclusion that roughly 80 to 90% of the time it is not the kid that is the identified patient, but at the very least the family system is the identified patient. At least the system as a whole. That's how you got to be thinking. That a kid, a child, and an adolescent is a product of a family system, whatever that family looks like. And our job as adults is to do whatever it takes to make sure that they know that this is safe and this is stable and people care enough to be proactive in making sure we offer stability. That's the first thing in terms of providing sanctuary, family safety and stability. The second one would be this. And one of the other sessions of this series deals with attachment. And John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth did a lot of work on attachment theory. I'm not going to spend time here specifically talking about that. But during childhood, as we prepare for adolescence, there is this thing called attachment that I think we need to open up a little bit what it means. I have chosen to shift from Bowlby's idea of mother attachment that he later shifted to a primary caretaker attachment. That's most therapy people talk about. Most that study attachment theory focus on the primary caretaker. I want to broaden it out. I want to bring theology to play here. Is that as we think about what a child needs, whether it's an infant or a child, needs from a family system to prepare for adolescence, it's the concept related to mother primary caretaker attachment, but it's bigger than this. And how do we get this? You go to scriptures. Now, probably if you're a student of the scriptures, maybe you are a specific denomination that uses the Bible a lot, and for other denominations that have actually heard of the Bible or actually seen one, it's in there. There is nothing in the New Testament at all, or in the whole Bible, that specifically tells moms what to do. Did you know that? There's no place in the Bible that says, moms, here's your job. Drive to soccer, make lunches, make sure you got dentist appointments, you arrange the PTA stuff, and by the way, you ought to work 30 to 50, 40 hours a week just to help out to make sure you can have the RV for the summer vacation. There's no list of rules for moms. It's almost like in the Bible, moms kind of know. There's kind of this intuition of what moms are supposed to be about. Well, we do have one little hint. In the New Testament, we got a little hint of what mothers are about and what children need. Even though it's not directly applied to mothering, in the Scriptures we do see a picture of mothering from the Apostle Paul. It's in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, where in verses 7 and 8, the Apostle Paul uses the metaphor of mothering to describe how he did his ministry. He talked about in verse 1 of 1 Thessalonians 2, our visit to you was not a failure. So part of the adult commitment to children is lifted up there. We go to them. We are the initiators. We are the proactive leaders of family stability and safety, but also in this attachment during childhood, what do they need? Paul says in verse 7 and 8, like a mother, we were gentle among you. Like a mother, we were gentle among you. So here's kind of the idea that I've grabbed onto, both in my study and work as a youth worker, a pastor, and as a parent and a consultant to folks, is the whole idea of maternal attachment during childhood. It is the second aspect of providing sanctuary, is that every child needs to know that there are people in their life that provide the gentle acceptance that they crave. And really what maternal attachment is about is providing this environment of gentleness, usually focused in one person. That's what attachment theory talks about. But I believe it's also, if there's a married couple in play, that a man presents this as well. A husband, even a stepdad, grandparents, foster parents, is all adults involved in the life of a child participates in maternal attachment. And that means during childhood, we build within the inner structure of their soul their belief that they are capable and worthy of intimate relationships. That's what maternal attachment is about. During childhood, what we build into them is a confidence that they are worthy of intimate relationships. Maternal attachment during childhood. Preparing for adolescence, a kid needs to know, I have people that love me, have been gentle with me, and I'm worthy of that. So then what happens? Okay, they go up the pole of childhood, and then they get on this new tightrope. Some people, and there are still books and speakers out there that say this, and frankly, I'll be honest, it kind of drives me crazy. And if you're like me, and I know I am, this drives me crazy. Because a lot of people say when a kid hits adolescence, they want to separate from the family system. There is not a shred of evidence that says a kid wants to separate from their family system. What happens when they move from child to adolescence? So as we prepare children, prepare parents, prepare all of us, we need to understand this. Here's what happens. This is the third area of building this kind of sanctuary around our kids. When they shift from childhood into adolescence, they don't want to separate from the family, they want to separate from the role of child in the family. Really different. In fact, scholars, maybe you've heard of a woman named Margaret Mahler. She was a great thinker, developmentalist. She was a great psychologist, developmental psychologist. She probably worked at Nordstrom's in the women's shoe department just to supplement her income. I really have no idea. But Margaret Mahler talked about separation individuation that happens in infancy. You go from the role of infant to child. Well, then a guy named Peter Bloss in the late 60s, he talked about the second separation individuation stage of life. It's where you shift separating from the role of child and you enter a whole new role where you're individuating in this new role known as adolescence. And I talk about in another tape the process of individuation. That's what Bloss talks about, using Mahler for infants and now Peter Bloss. That's what adolescence is. So what do you look for? You need the family safety and stability. You may not act like it. I don't need anything. I don't need my mom. I want to be with my friends. Well, you really do need your mom, your dad, your step-parent, your foster parents. You need family safety and stability. You also need to recall that maternal attachment, the gentleness of childhood. But what else do you need? This is where, and it's understudied, it's not talked about a lot, but the idea in psychological works is father attachment, where there's something about our Father that grabs onto our soul with incredible hooks. It's like father attachment is a safety net underneath the tightrope of adolescence. And I am at this stage of my life and career. In 10 years I may find evidence that shows this differently. I will admit that. But at this stage of my life and career, I am convinced that it's our biological father that has hooks in us. We want our dad to bless us. We want our father to somehow say we are worthy to enter the outside world. That as we individuate, as we ask the three questions of identity, autonomy, and belonging, who am I? Where do I have power? Do my choices matter? Autonomy, belonging, where do I fit? Somewhere in our psyche, we look to the person that generally represents the outside world to us, our dad, to bless us. Now, there's a lot more to this, and this often can bring pain to folks, so make sure you hear me out on this one. There's all kind of evidence. It's adopted kids that go looking for their, quote, real dad, when the only father they've known has been their adoptive father their whole life. Can be great pain to a family, and even that man, if he doesn't understand this, especially during mid-adolescence. There's even new evidence that all those children born through artificial insemination and now are somewhere around 20, 21, 22 years old and younger. A whole bunch of kids from artificial insemination that never really know their biological father. When they find out they're artificially inseminated, they say roughly 16, 17, 18 years old, I want to go find my, quote, real dad. What an awful thing to hear as a parent. Because you go, I have treated you like my own all these years. It's painful. But what it reminds us of, if all of us could slow down on how we feel and regarding this situation and just imagine there's something inside of us, that there's a father that has a DNA connected to us. And it's appropriate, on the other hand, to want to know our roots. There's something deep in our psyche that says, I want to know where I'm connected. Now, I pretty much promise you, depending on all other factors, almost across the board, when that kid hits late adolescence and moves into adulthood, they're going to come back and apologize. They're going to come back and say, you were my dad, step-parent, step-dad, adopted dad, real dad, who was not my biological father. You really were my father in every way. But I went through a journey of having to ask that question. That's what this father attachment is about. And kids that do not report a high level of father attachment, and it is related to the adolescent's perception of their father, they report much higher rates of most of the risk factors of adolescence. There's a longing in our soul. So when there is a deficit, when there is not a father there, when a father's abandoned their child, when a father is treating their child as if the kid doesn't exist, there's something that happens in kids almost always at some level, and we need to be aware of that. Now, that's the bad news. I got some good news for you on this one. And some of you are saying, well, I wish we had listened to the tape at this point. Now turn it back on. Because every father has deficits in his ability to create a healthy father attachment. There are holes in all of our safety nets. The greatest father, and I want you to know that my wife's husband would be considered the greatest father in the world. But my own kids would be happy to tell you, and I won't let them on tape. They're here, but I'm not letting them on tape. Would tell you where I have blown it as a dad, where I've disappointed them, where I've communicated to them they are only as good as they perform and fit into my agenda, where I have exasperated them and hurt them. See, here's what's interesting, is the Bible does give fathers some advice. You remember I said mothers? There's nothing in the Bible about mothers. There's stuff about dads. Yes, there is in there, and but it's only two things. In Colossians 3, verse 21, Paul writes this, fathers, don't embitter your children. And then in Galatians 6:4, fathers, don't exasperate your children. Well, let's unpack those for a second. In the Colossians passage, don't embitter your children. Embittering your kid is like the slow drip of bitterness, causing them by how we treat them to make them more and more bitter. Exasperation, Ephesians 6:4. Don't exasperate your kids. That's more like a pushing their buttons. I got to tell you, I'm an incredibly great dad. I've worked with kids my entire career. I am a trained social scientist, University of Denver, where Condoleezza Rice went. Yes, thank you very much. Her grade point's higher than mine. But I got a lot together. I'm a great dad. I am really good at embittering and exasperating my kids. In fact, those are my spiritual gifts. I am great at embittering and exasperating my kids, as are you, dads, which is why the Bible talks about them. What is father attachment about? Well, in the Bible, Paul uses the same thing that he did with like a mother, we were gentle among you, same text, 1 Thessalonians 2 to verse 11 and 12. Like a father, we were there. This is father attachment. We were there to encourage you, to comfort you, and to urge you to live lives worthy of God. That's what being a dad is. To encourage you, to comfort you, and to urge you to live lives worthy of the God who loves you. Urging not as a kid, get at it. I challenge you. Youth workers, I want you to quit saying I challenge you to kids. Parents, youth workers, teachers, all of us, therapists, we need to understand that during adolescence, we got to have somebody that's standing below us yelling at us, hey, I'm here to encourage you. You're doing okay. You're great. You slipped a little bit. How can I help you? You're doing fantastic. I want to listen to you and be there for you. I want to encourage you. Comfort. That hurts, doesn't it? Urge you as a fan. I'm your fan. I'm here. You're going to make it. You're doing great. 1 Thessalonians 2, verse 11 and 12. What happens when there are holes in there? Well, if a father has died, it's the legacy, as best I understand, the legacy of that father's relationship to the kid that needs to be carried on. And that helps a kid to believe that there's his dad there to support him and encourage him or her. But if a father's abandoned their child and there's no contact, it's still how we talk about that father. A little more difficult if there's a father in the picture, maybe in a divorce or separation situation where the dad really is not blessing the kid and doesn't seem to care about any other input. And that can cause a lot of pain for the family system. I deeply encourage you to get professional help to work through that situation. Because case by case, there's different things that need to be done. And the kid is going to get wounded in the process. But even in the best families or where a father wasn't absent, the good news for us in Christ is the Old Testament declares that God is the father to the fatherless. And so what happens, either if there's not a safety net there or if there are holes in our safety net, is that we're not talking about father attachment as the most significant way to offer sanctuary. It's paternal attachment. Just as with a child and an infant, they need maternal attachment, that a dad can supply that as well. A stepdad, a grandparent, a foster parent. Other friends supply maternal attachment, building the inner belief that I am worthy for intimate relationships. For paternal attachment, it's we partner with a dad if he's present, and we supplant the loss of a dad. We are there to be the father to the fatherless as a community of people around kids. It's like we have little trampolines, little tiny safety nets underneath kids. A stepdad, for example, is not the biological father. And to a child going through early and mid-adolescence, often a kid will push against the influence of that stepfather. But a stepdad plays a powerful paternal attachment role. You're not the dad. Don't try to be the dad. You are a fan of the kid who encourages and comforts as another trampoline beneath their tightrope. You have a huge influence over the kid. But you're not having to replace the pain of a dad that does not know how to bless. You are a support system that God will use to encourage your kid. Youth workers, teachers, coaches, you're little trampolines. Moms, you're a trampoline. You participate in paternal attachment, family safety and stability, maternal attachment, building gentleness, giving gentleness to a kid so that they build the internal sense that I'm worthy of a safe relationship, an intimate relationship. What's paternal attachment? I build the confidence in a kid that there's a choir of fans that there are a bunch of people that care and are there for you to give them the external confidence to make it in a world that's hostile. See, that's what a kid needs. And lastly, the fourth way we offer sanctuary is we have a trajectory. As we prepare for adolescence, it's not just trying to survive high school. It's preparing for adolescence in order to allow for the whole lifespan, to prepare for the reason we were created in the first place. Dependence on the Heavenly Father and interdependence on the people of God. That's the fourth. To build sanctuary is to have a trajectory that says, ultimately what you're longing for and looking for. Moms will disappoint, dads will disappoint, step-parents will disappoint. The family's not quite as safe as I wish it was, but there's a God here who absolutely cares. And there's a people here known as the family of God. These four, that's what it means to offer sanctuary to kids. Now, I've talked about 4 keys. The third key is this. We had the first, if you recall, on your screen you see it. The first is to understand. The second is to provide sanctuary. Now the third gets more and more practical. We need to boundary kids' experience as we prepare them for entering adulthood. All the way through childhood, early adolescence on the tightrope, mid-adolescence, and late adolescence, our role is to boundary them. Here's what happens. Since we're moving children and adolescents from dependency in the family system to interdependency in the people of God in the community, we have to help them to move along the tightrope of independence. What that means is our job is to boundary their life experience so that they are able to take on more and more adult roles, take on more and more of their identity that was created in them through Jesus Christ, and find a place where they fit. What that means is our job is to provide boundaries. Not firm boundaries that are stuck. We do not build walls around our kids' experience. We don't say, when you're born until you're 5, here are the rules. When you're 5 until you're 11, rules. 11 to 14, rules. 15, 17, rules. We have these arbitrary rules. Let me tell you a couple that you don't use. Don't ever say, when you're 18, you can get a tattoo. You will be buying stock in a tattoo parlor when they're 18 and 3 days old if you use an arbitrary date. We have arbitrary dates for bedtimes. We have arbitrary dates for going out. A lot of us say 16 years old you're allowed to date. What if they're 15 and 3/4, they have a really healthy relationship with somebody that's 16 and a half that knows the family, and it's a really cool thing. And you have the opportunity to use the relationship and all the factors that have come together. If you've had this arbitrary rule that's hard and fast at 16, you're dead. Because you'll go, no, which will drive your kid further away from you. It will cause a lack of trust in you, and they will dive into the world beneath and do whatever they want to. So what do you do? What is a boundary? Well, it's kind of like a horse. Yes, I know some people that have horses, and if you have a horse and you want to apply this particular thing to a horse, it's like during childhood they have a little paddock. And within that paddock, kind of small area, you allow your kid a little bit of freedom to begin to experience, even before they hit adolescence, a bit of independence. That's really the move that Mahler's talking about. Separation, individuation from infant to child is as they begin a tiny little bit of independence, like things like bedtime. You give them an opportunity to kind of talk about what they believe about their bedtime. You don't give away the store, but you give them some power and influence. You show them some respect that's age appropriate. Then as they get a little bit older, you begin to put them into the pasture of adolescence. And your pastor has this fence around it that is the boundary of their life. And you encourage them to live their lives within this boundary. When they blow it, you have to pull back that fence through a discussion and a conversation. But you always still maintain a sense of family stability, gentleness, being a fan, and the trajectory of Jesus Christ and His community. You keep that going. You keep loving your kid. You keep caring for them. You keep listening. You keep an attitude of joy and connection. But you pull in the boundaries. You don't get upset. You don't exasperate. You don't fight. Your job is to boundary. I love you. We got to have boundaries. Oh, I'm so mad. I know I'm mad too because I care about you. Let's look at the boundaries. And then as they show more and more individuation that's healthy, you open up the boundaries. Here's your goal. By the time a kid hits 18 years old, hits senior year of high school, you want to have the fence down. And you want to have an underground fence that you can pull out that collar, that shock collar, anytime you want. Now, maybe you kind of dangle it in front of them with a little grin on your face going, the fence is down, but we still do have a fence there. Let's never forget that. Things like curfew, things like who they spend time with, where they spend their time. You want to have your kid in their last year in your home be experiencing complete individuation, even under the rules of your home, but in a way that trusts them to try to figure out how to live that life. You do not want them to have to figure out how to live their life when they go off to college or the military on their own. And that's what boundarying is. It's the dance of negotiation along the way. Give them power to become independent and somehow negotiate relation all the way through childhood and adulthood. It would be the tapestry of consequences, where consequences need to somehow be connected to the relational trajectory they're on, as opposed to directly connecting to the offense. I know we've all heard that. Make sure the consequence connects to the offense. I don't think that works, especially with adolescents. If they're late for curfew, what we want to say is, no more going out. We want to ground them. Is grounding really the best way to go? That's it. You can't go anywhere. You stay in your room, you do the computer, play PlayStation, listen to your music, talk to your friends, and text everybody. That may not be the best problem. What's the consequences? Like a tapestry. Every kid needs to be treated differently with consequences of violating boundaries. You pull the boundaries back in, you renegotiate that, but you force them to talk through the issue. It's like a tapestry. The back of a tapestry looks like it's random. The front is a beautiful mosaic of where you want a kid to go. Beautiful picture. And lastly, build an authentic relationship. Because preparing for adolescence is preparing for a lifetime of friendship. See, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Whether you're a parent or you're a friend or you're a youth worker, a counselor, a teacher, whatever role you play, you are participating as one of the many trampolines of support and care, of participating in the gentleness of maternal attachment by letting kids know that as they go across this tightrope, they are safe and they are loved. So lastly, the goal. Point kids toward the goal. The goal of raising children is that they would come to know the God who has created them and calls them to this grand dance known as the kingdom. That's the goal. The goal is not whether they wear a hat in church when they're in 8th grade. That's a blip. Deal with it carefully. Don't lose your cool. Deal with all the issues of raising them, but recognize along the way you provide sanctuary, safety, support. You do boundary their experience, but you're constantly pointing them to the Jesus Christ that calls them. How do you do that? First, you model it. Kids will experience more truth in life out of what they see than what they hear, hands down. Secondly, you treat them with the respect that Jesus Christ treats them with. And thirdly, you let them know that the God that calls them is a God of mercy and forgiveness. Luke 15, the trilogy of the lost, especially the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son. Henry Nouwen's great book on it, The Return of the Prodigal. He got it after reflecting on the great painting by Rembrandt, The Return of the Prodigal, hanging in the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, where if you notice the hands of the father, if you see that great painting, here's a slide of it. Take a look at this painting as you hear my description. One hand is the hand of a mother, the other hand is the hand of a father who embraces the returning prodigal, who really has messed up, shaved head, dirty clothes, torn shoes, the loving embrace of the Father who receives them with mercy, healing, and forgiveness. That has to permeate every aspect of our lives in relationship to children. This great God who embraces all of us and will take our kids and draw them to himself as we lift him up in our lives, in the way we model, and the way that we care for our children, providing sanctuary, gentleness, tenderness and being a fan who is always there with their agenda, trajectory as the center of our calling to help them through this time. So thanks for listening, and be a fan of those precious kids God has given to you.